I would like to introduce Rylee Burnand this morning, that's going to be telling the story of Queen Esther. She's worked very hard on this story. This isn't a typical godly place story that we have upstairs with all the wooden pieces. So she has some special props she's going to use. And this is an exciting story to tell. It's a pretty big story to tell. So I'm very proud of Rylee for all her hard work, and looking forward to hearing her tell the story today of Queen Esther. Thank you very much.
Esther the Jewess was only a little girl when both her parents died, and she went to live in the home of her cousin Mordecai. Her new home was in the great city of Shushan, where the king of Persia lived. Her cousin Mordecai had an office in the household of the king. He was very kind to Esther and loved her as his own child. After Esther grew up to young womanhood, the king of Persia made a great feast in his palace. He invited all of the nobles and rulers of his kingdom. Then, at the last day of the feast, he invited all the men of Shushan, both great and small, to come to the palace and share in his entertainment. Perhaps Mordecai was there too. Women in that country always wore veils over their faces when in the presence of men other than their own husbands, and they could not attend the same feast with them. So the queen, Vashti, gave a feast to the women at the same time as the king's feast to the men. On the last day of the feast, which continued for a whole week, the king grew very reckless because he had drunk much wine, and he wished to see his beautiful wife, the queen. He wished that all people attending his feast might see how beautiful she was. So he sent some of his servants to bring her into his part of the royal palace, where all the guests could behold her beauty. But Vashti the queen refused to appear in the presence of all the men in Shushan. And she told the king's servants that she would not come. She believed that the king's request was unwise because it was contrary to the customs of her people. The king was very angry when the servants returned alone and told him that Vashti would not come with them. He called his wise men and asked what should be done with Vashti, the queen, who had dared to disobey him. And one of the wise men said, "The queen has done wrong, not only to you, O king, but to the princes and to all the people who dwell in your kingdom. For when this deed comes known, the women everywhere will no longer respect their husbands as they should. Therefore, let her be queen no longer, but choose another who is better than she to take her place." This advice pleased the king, and he refused to let Vashti come into his presence again. He refused to let her be queen any longer, and decided to choose another beautiful young woman to be queen instead. So he sent commands out all throughout his kingdom that the most beautiful young woman should be brought to his palace, where he might choose among them the one who would please him best. This one would make queen instead of Vashti. Mordecai knew that Esther was a beautiful young woman, and he believed she would make a beautiful queen. So he sent her into the palace with the other young women who came from different parts of the kingdom, and there she was taught the manners of the court life, so she would know how to please the king. But Mordecai told her not to let the fact become known that her people were the Jews. After living in the palace for some time, Esther was brought before the king, and she pleased him so much that he chose her at once to become the queen instead of Vashti. He placed the royal crown of Persia upon her head and gave her rooms in his palace and many servants to attend her. Then he made a great feast for his princes and nobles, called the Esther's Feast, and published the fact that Esther had been chosen as the new queen. Mordecai no longer see the young woman who he had cared for as tenderly as his own daughter. But every day he passed by the palace where she lived and she could see him from her window. She would send messages to him by her faithful servants, and they would bring back the messages that Mordecai wished for her to receive. Then Mordecai would return to the king's gate and sit there as a watchman. While sitting in the gate, Mordecai saw two servants of the king who whispered together about some secret matter. He watched closely and learned that they were angry with the king and were planning to kill him. So he sent word to the king by Queen Esther, and she gave the warning in Mordecai's name. The king investigated the matter and found that the men were guilty, so he put them to death. Then the warning of Mordecai and how he had saved the king's life were written in a book. But the king forgot about Mordecai's kindness to him and did not promote him in the kingdom. He did not know that Mordecai, the Jew, was a relative of the beautiful young woman who wore the royal crown.